keep going with Kandinsky, which is admittedly extremely difficult. I recommend that someone read the very short paragraph that I gave on why I think Kandinsky's work is important to the context of, I would say, group practice. And he wants to talk more. I mean, the chapter about this is again Kandinsky concerning the spiritual in art, and it's a chapter on the language of form and color. And he wants to talk about the sort of inner need of artists toward sort of spiritual expression, and then go into the language of color. And so let's see what Kandinsky has to say. It's rather a lot, and it says, quote, "The inner need is built up of three mystical elements. One, every artist as a creator has something in him which calls for expression. This is the element of personality. Two, every artist as child of his age is impelled to express the spirit of his art. This is the element of style, dictated by the period and particular country to which the artist belongs. It's doubtful how long the latter distinction will continue to exist." Okay, so he's talking about personality and then about style, influenced by the sort of culture and time that we're thrown into. And three, he says, every artist, as a servant of art, has to help the cause of art. This is the element of pure artistry, which is constant in all ages and among all nationalities. So, service to art. Okay, then he says, a full understanding of the first two elements, personality and style, is necessary for a realization of the third. But he who has this realization will recognize that a rudely carved Indian column is an expression of the same spirit as actuates any real work of art of today. Yep, so sort of there's a way that he's talking here about, firstly, not only art for art's sake, but art for the sake of sort of cultivating empathic resonance. So mutual recognition or mind sight, recognition of the other as other. So like, oh, hey, they're doing art too. So there seems to be, I would say there's a relationship between art and diplomacy. Quote, in the past and even today, much talk is heard of personality in art. Talk of the coming style becomes more frequent daily. But for all their importance today, these questions will have disappeared after a few hundred or thousand years. Only the third element, that of pure artistry, will remain forever. Quote, an Egyptian carving speaks to us today more subtly than it did to its chronological contemporaries, for they judged it with their hampering knowledge of period and personality. But we can judge purely as an expression of the eternal artistry. Okay, so again, he's talking about style and personality as more sort of fleeting or temporal, whereas it's sort of art in its art for its own sake, in a way. Art for the sake of artistry is eternal. He says, similarly, the greater the part played in a modern work of art by the two elements of style and personality, the better it will be appreciated by people today. But a modern work of art which is full of the third element will fail to reach the contemporary soul. For many centuries have to pass away before the third element can be received with understanding, but the artist in whose work this third element predominates is the really great artist. Okay, so he's talking about this sort of trade-off relationship of like resonating more with the people of your time by expressing style and personality and expressing something more sort of eternal, which he calls is sort of greater or in a sense higher, but you have to sort of accept not being as popular at this particular time, let's say. And he goes on, because the elements of style and personality make up what is called the periodic characteristics of any work of art, the development of artistic forms must depend on their separation from the element of pure artistry, which knows neither period nor nationality. So there's a way in which style and personality sort of derive from the eternal, come down from the eternal. Quote, but as style and personality create in every epoch certain definite forms, which for all their superficial differences are really closely related, these forms can be spoken of as one side of art, the subjective. So he talks about the sort of temporally bounded elements of sort of style and personality as connected with subjectivity. And then he says, every artist chooses from the forms which reflect his own time, those which are sympathetic to him, and expresses himself through them. So the subjective element is the definitive and external expression of the inner objective element. Again, quote, so the subjective element is the definite and external expression of the inner objective element. Okay, that's Confusing. Yeah, so what he's talking about is that, again, the elements of sort of style and personality, which are in a way more temporally bounded and more subjective, the artist chooses among them. And he's saying that the artist chooses among them something which is more eternal, something which is more objective, which he talks about as a kind of inner need. So there's a way that the artist reaches through style and reaches through personality using forms that he appreciates, that they appreciate, toward something which is more eternal. And then he says, the inevitable desire for outward expression of the objective element, which I've here connected with the eternal, is the impulse here defined as the inner need. The forms it borrows change from day to day, and as it continually advances, what is today a phrase of inner harmony becomes tomorrow one of outer harmony. It's clear, therefore, that the inner spirit of art only uses the outer form of any particular period as a stepping stone to further expression. Let's keep going. He says, in short, the working of the inner need and the development of art is an ever advancing expression of the eternal and objective in terms of the periodic and subjective. That's pretty self-explanatory, just sort of saying the same thing. The more temporary and more, in a sense, subjective forms that we choose are stepping stones toward that which is eternal and objective. And we step through, we step along those stones as a kind of along a kind of inner need, a trajectory or gradient of inner need. Okay, let's get through this section. He says, because the objective is forever exchanging the subjective expression of today for that of tomorrow, each new extension of liberty in the use of outer form is hailed as the last and supreme. At present, we say that an artist can use any form he wishes, so long as he remains in touch with nature. But this limitation, like all its predecessors, is only temporary. From the point of view of the inner need, no limitation must be made. The artist may use any form which his expression demands, for his inner impulse must find suitable outward expression. So we see that a deliberate search for personality and style is not only impossible, but comparatively unimportant. The close relationship of art throughout the ages is not a relationship of outward form, but in inner meaning. Yeah. And therefore, the talk of schools, of lines of development, schools of art, of principles of art, is based on misunderstanding and can only lead to confusion. So he's talking about similarity in art across the ages as a result of sort of inner similarity, not as a result of similarity in outward form. And therefore, he thinks that sort of schools of art or lines of development in art, principles of art, is a misleading kind of idea. He says, the artist must be blind to distinctions between recognized or unrecognized conventions of form. Deaf to the transitory teaching and demands of his particular age, he must watch only the trend of the inner need and hearken to its words alone. Then he will with safety employ means both sanctioned and forbidden by his contemporaries. All means are sacred which are called for by the inner need. All means are sinful which obscure that inner need. Again, all means are sacred which are called for by the inner need. All means are sinful which obscure that inner need. It is impossible to theorize about this ideal of art. In real art, theory does not precede practice, but follows practice. Everything is at first a matter of feeling, which is a kind of self-reference. Any theoretical scheme will be lacking in the essential of creation, the desire for expression, which cannot be determined. Neither the quality of the inner need, nor its subjective form can be measured nor weighed. Neither the quality of the inner need, nor its subjective form can be measured or weighed. As a footnote, quote, the many-sided genius of Leonardo devised a system of little spoons with which different colors were to be used, thus creating a kind of mechanical harmony. One of his pupils, after trying in vain to use this system, in despair asked one of his colleagues how the master himself used the invention. The colleague replied, the master never uses it at all. Again, quote, neither the qualities of the inner need nor its subjective form can be measured nor weighed. such a grammar of painting can only be temporarily guessed at, and should it ever be achieved, it will be not so much according to physical rules, but according to the rules of the inner need, which are of the soul. What I've decided to do is leave this as separate because Kandinsky is so dense that I want the stuff on color to be broken up a bit. So he's about to move into talk about color. And what I'm going to do is share what we're going to be moving into. I would invite you to consider this. Whoop, where did it go? Yeah, so he's going to talk about antitheses, movements of opposites in terms of color and warm and cold. And I'll come back to that. Bye.